By the latter half of 1943, the strategic landscape of the Battle of the Atlantic was undergoing a painful but decisive reversal for Nazi Germany. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the supreme commander of the U-boat arm, watched with grim apprehension as his submarine fleet, once the terror of the seas, suffered devastating, unsustainable losses. The Allied defenses had reached a tipping point. The implementation of the convoy escort carrier, the widespread use of centimetric radar, like the formidable ASW Mk3, and vastly improved coordination among escort groups were systematically dismantling the famed wolf pack tactic. Faced with an existential crisis for the U-boat fleet, Dönitz desperately required a revolutionary technological counterpunch, a weapon that could once again shift the balance of power. His answer was the G7es Zaunkönig I, known internally as the Falcon, and later simply as the Acoustic Torpedo. This was not an evolution of ordnance, it was a fundamental redesign of naval warfare. The Zaunkönig was purpose-built to neutralize the most effective component of the Allied defense, the fast, maneuvering escort ships. Unlike conventional torpedoes, which demanded precise, complex aiming based on predicting a target's course, the Zaunkönig was a true fire-and-forget weapon. Once launched from the U-boat's torpedo tube at a shallow depth, its highly sensitive internal hydrophones, acoustic sensors, would immediately activate. These sensors were tuned to detect the characteristic, low-frequency sound of a ship's propellers, specifically, the turbulent noise created by cavitation, the formation and collapse of vapor bubbles at the propeller tips. The torpedo would then autonomously guide itself towards the loudest sound source within its listening range. Though intentionally slower than its conventional counterparts, moving at a mere 24 knots compared to the older HMS 30+ knots, its active homing capability was meant to guarantee a kill against the very ships tasked with protecting the convoys. Dönitz's strategic intent was clear. Eliminate the escorts, expose the vulnerable merchant fleet, and resume the throttling of Britain's lifeblood. The Zaunkönig was rushed into operational service with a potent sense of urgency within the U-boat fleet, reflecting the high hopes Dönitz placed upon it. Its terrifying debut occurred in the tumultuous North Atlantic in September 1943. The first recorded operational success came on September 20th, during an engagement with convoy on 202. U-boat U-603 executed a daring maneuver and fired a Zaunkönig. The torpedo, acting exactly as designed, tracked the sound signature of the Allied escort screen, impacting and fatally sinking the British destroyer HMS Lagan and severely damaging another warship. Just 2 days later, the psychological shock intensified when U-221, utilizing the same acoustic weapon, successfully tracked and sank the Canadian corvette HMS St. Croix. These initial strikes sent a seismic shockwave through the Allied Naval Command. The reports from survivors and damaged vessels described a weapon that appeared almost magical in its lethality, a torpedo that often left no visible track, unlike steam-powered torpedoes, and struck suddenly, without warning, often from an impossible angle. The psychological terror inflicted on the escort crews was immense. They were now fighting an enemy they could not evade by traditional zigzagging maneuvers. Crucially, fragments of intercepted German communications, deciphered through the top-secret ultra-intelligence network, began to confirm the existence of a new, highly effective acoustic weapon. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, and Admiral Sir Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches, immediately recognized the existential gravity of the threat. If a torpedo could autonomously lock onto the sounds of their most vital ASW assets, the foundational defensive doctrine that had slowly been winning the Atlantic War was rendered instantly obsolete. A scientific counteroffensive was necessary, and it had to be launched yesterday. The desperate need for a countermeasure was directed to the highly secretive, compartmentalized scientific establishments of both Britain and the United States. The challenge was elegantly simple in concept but brutally complex in execution. How do you make a ship silent, or, failing that, how do you make something else louder? The answer, arrived at through parallel brainstorming and intensive research, was the acoustic decoy. Two primary projects emerged: the British Foxer Type 132 for the Royal Navy, and the American Fanfare, later often grouped under the Foxer operational designation. Both aimed to create a towed, expendable noise source that would generate a sound signature significantly louder and more attractive than the target ship's own propellers, effectively drawing the acoustic torpedo away onto a harmless intercept course. The core design for the early prototypes was strikingly rudimentary. A long, hollow steel pipe or noise drum was engineered with strategically placed holes and rotating vanes. As this device was pulled rapidly through the water rushing through the holes and the motion of the vanes would create powerful, uncontrolled cavitation bubbles. The rapid collapse of these bubbles generated a deafening, broadband mechanical noise, the exact sonic signature the Zaunkönig was programmed to hunt. Speed and urgency were paramount. Prototypes were manufactured and refined at breakneck speed, often using scarce wartime materials and installed directly on escorts immediately upon delivery. The successful development of a consistently effective acoustic decoy represented the first, critical step in neutralizing the Zaunкönig's terrifying advantage. The phase of initial deployment of the Foxer Fanfare systems demanded immense logistical effort and the rapid re-education of thousands of escort crew members. The equipment itself, often two large booms extending from the stern of the ship, towing the metal noisemakers, was cumbersome and difficult to handle under combat conditions. The early Foxer systems were immediately beset by operational challenges that complicated the battle. While the device successfully distracted the Zaunkönig, the sheer volume of broadband noise it produced often completely overwhelmed the escort's own ASTIC sonar equipment, rendering the ship deaf to the presence and movements of the attacking U-boat. This created a perilous tactical catch-22. A ship could protect itself from the torpedo, but in doing so, it effectively lost the ability to hunt the submarine, allowing the U-boat to escape or reload. Furthermore, the long cables and heavy towed devices occasionally fouled the escort's own propellers or rudders during violent evasive maneuvers, temporarily disabling the very ships they were meant to protect. Despite these early teething problems, the basic principle of the decoy worked, and commanders rapidly issued revised tactical doctrine. Upon any indication of an acoustic torpedo attack, either through hydrophones or the sinking of a nearby ship, the escort would immediately deploy the Foxer, increase speed to lengthen the acoustic separation between ship and decoy, and maintain evasive action. The objective was to force the Zaunkönig into making its final homing decision based on the louder, non-essential target trailing safely behind the vulnerable warship. The immediate success of the Foxer Fanfare systems unequivocally informed the U-boat High Command that their technological advantage was ephemeral. Dönitz's intelligence staff quickly analyzed reports from returning U-boats, noting the consistent failure of the Zaunkönig to hit targets protected by the new tail noise. This intelligence fueled the urgent demand for a next-generation acoustic torpedo. The German response was the development of the improved Zaunkönig II, designated T-11. This new weapon was an attempt to regain the initiative by incorporating a far more sophisticated acoustic homing head, specifically designed to filter out the high-intensity, broadband mechanical noise characteristic of the Foxer decoy. The T-11 was intended to focus its guidance mechanism narrowly on the telltale frequency range of a ship's actual propeller cavitation. However, Allied scientists were not resting on their initial success. They actively refined the Foxer system, developing more powerful, acoustically complex, and deployable noisemakers to overwhelm even the T-11's improved filtering. Crucially, research was initiated into active countermeasures, devices that could transmit electronic or acoustic signals designed not merely to decoy, but to actively jam and confuse the torpedo's internal guidance circuitry. This dynamic, rapid-fire interplay of German innovation followed by Allied countermeasure became a defining subplot of the closing stages of the Battle of the Atlantic, with both scientific and naval commands desperately fighting for that decisive, if temporary, technological edge in the deadly, silent conflict beneath the waves. The definitive defeat of the Zaunkönig was fundamentally a scientific victory achieved in the laboratory, not solely on the high seas. Allied scientists, working in intense secrecy within specialized acoustic research centers, often in places like the Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Experimental Establishment, ESE, engaged in a painstaking effort to decipher the torpedo's precise acoustic mind. They discovered that the German acoustic homing system, particularly the initial G7es Zaunkönig I, was designed to prioritize two key acoustic properties: the frequency of the sound corresponding to the revolutions per minute or RPM of a large ship's propellers, and the intensity of the sound, the chaotic, broadband noise created by cavitation. Crucially, the Allied researchers determined that the Zaunkönig was primarily sensitive to broadband noise and was programmed to ignore sounds below a certain threshold, to avoid homing onto the U-boat itself, and to seek the loudest source. This led to a key innovation: the development of the definitive Mark I acoustic noise maker. This system was meticulously engineered to generate a powerful, specific, and overwhelmingly loud cacophony of cavitation and mechanical noise. Achieving the necessary noise output required precise metallurgical engineering to ensure the towed devices did not break apart under stress and hydrodynamic stability to ensure consistent noise generation at high speed. This noise had to be orders of magnitude louder than the escort's own propellers to ensure the torpedo's guidance system, and often its magnetic proximity fuse, was triggered by the decoy. This intense scientific effort transformed the simple act of deploying a towed device into a sophisticated exercise in controlled counteracoustics, solidifying the wall of sound as an insurmountable sonic barrier. The scientific and naval triumph over the acoustic torpedo produced a lasting legacy that continues to define modern naval warfare. The fundamental principles established by the Foxer system in 1943, the concept of a towed, sacrificial noise source, became the foundational blueprint for all subsequent naval anti-torpedo countermeasures. Modern major surface combatants and aircraft carriers are today equipped with highly sophisticated, automated acoustic decoy systems, such as the American and /SLQ-25 Nixie or various chaff/acoustic decoys, all operating on the core doctrine, presenting the inbound acoustic threat with a superior, expendable sonic target. Furthermore, the intense wartime hydroacoustic research spurred by the Zaunkönig threat fundamentally accelerated the scientific fields of underwater acoustics and sonar design. The necessity of precisely classifying and generating underwater sounds directly led to the development of vastly more capable, powerful, and precise sonar systems, which remain the indispensable backbone of modern anti-submarine warfare, ASW. The wall of sound created by Allied scientists remains an enduring and essential symbol of how rapid, focused ingenuity secured the vital sea lanes, neutralizing a revolutionary weapon, and paving the way for eventual Allied victory. The technological duel between the acoustic torpedo and the Foxer system became a classic case study in a technological arms race driven by existential necessity. The initial German technological leap, Zaunkönig, was instantly countered by the Allied acoustic decoy, Foxer. This dynamic forced the German development of the T-11's frequency filtration, which the Allies were already preparing to nullify with improved, more acoustically complex decoys and the development of rudimentary active acoustic jamming systems. Crucially, the intense Allied focus on understanding underwater sound, the very mechanism the torpedo exploited, spurred revolutionary advances in their own ASTIC/sonar technology. By studying how sound propagated and was reflected, the Allies dramatically improved their own ability to detect the U-boats themselves, even in difficult oceanic conditions involving thermal layers or heavy weather. The necessity of understanding underwater sound propagation to defeat the torpedo directly translated into the development of more capable, precise, and longer-range sonar systems. This victory demonstrated that sustained success in the Battle of the Atlantic depended less on the fleeting promise of a single wonder weapon and far more on the Allied capacity for rapid, coordinated scientific problem-solving, manufacturing efficiency, and continuous tactical adaptation. The success of the Allied Fokker Fanfare system had a devastating and instantaneous psychological impact on the German U-boat crews. The Zaunkönig had been widely promoted within the Kriegsmarine as the ultimate counter to the growing Allied air and sea superiority, a guaranteed kill. Instead, U-boat captains began submitting demoralizing reports. Their prized, technologically advanced torpedoes were executing erratic, confused maneuvers, circling aimlessly, and ultimately detonating harmlessly hundreds of yards astern of the actual targets, drawn away by the relentless mechanical noise of the decoy. The psychological toll of seeing a complex, high-cost weapon system wasted on a simple towed noisemaker was profound. While the German response, the Zaunkönig II T-11, was quickly developed with sophisticated acoustic filters intended to ignore the Fokker's broadband noise and focus narrowly on the ship's specific propeller frequency, it was a case of too little, too late. The T-11 proved highly complex, unreliable, and arrived too late for mass production. By the time it was ready, the Allied ASW campaign was fully mature, deploying integrated hunter-killer groups with superior radar and sonar capabilities, effectively dominating the crucial mid-Atlantic. The failure of the Zaunkönig to recover the initiative contributed significantly to the declining operational effectiveness, plunging morale, and escalating surrender rate among the U-boat crews in the crucial years of 1944 to 1945. The implementation of the Fokker Fanfare countermeasures necessitated a revolutionary and immediate overhaul of all established Allied convoy defense tactics. Escort commanders were quickly trained to integrate the decoy into aggressive evasive maneuvers. The standing operating procedure upon detecting an acoustic torpedo launch, often identified by the characteristic, abrupt sound on the escort's own hydrophones or a telltale splash, became a three-part rapid sequence. First, the immediate deployment of the Fokker/Fanfare at maximum speed to maximize the acoustic separation between the ship and the noisemaker. Second, the escort was commanded to execute a violent, high-speed turn, a maneuver specifically designed to break the acoustic lock of the torpedo's internal hydrophones and disrupt the predictable wake sound the torpedo might follow. Third, once the immediate threat was diverted, the escort could then rapidly decelerate or execute silent run protocols, minimizing the ship's own propeller cavitation, making the towed decoy the only significant target. Furthermore, Allied ASW doctrine evolved aggressively towards preemption. Hunter-killer groups were now instructed to launch snapshot attacks, immediate volleys of depth charges, upon the very first detection of a U-boat, granting the submarine minimum time to stabilize, calculate the escort's speed, and align for the launch of the relatively slow-moving acoustic torpedo. This aggressive combination of passive sonic diversion and proactive tactical offense collectively neutralized the U-boat's brief technological advantage.